You wrote an interesting article about the Me Too thing.
Yeah.
Tell me about that article.
I'm at a conference, right? Going out to dinner with a client, and I'm a hugger. She was a hugger. So we have a couple bottles of wine. We have dinner. Go to give her a hug, and like, bam, like kisses me right in the mouth. And again, I'm like happily married,
Sure.
like, and have been for a long time and want to stay for a long time. But I write every day. So I was like, how do I write about this? But I don't want to burn this relationship because it was an important relationship for me. And so I just came up with these rules of hugging. Like there should be rules about this, right? And so it was professional workplace hugging rules, threw it up on the blog, didn't even think about it. Next day I'm at the conference and like I'm speaking and get off and like my phone is literally, I have like 127 text messages. So what happened was like the CEO of LinkedIn, Jeff Weiner, like actually found it. Someone had passed it on and like he shared it and it went viral.
Because you're a hugger. I read the thing. You're a hugger.
Yeah. So I mean, this happened like 5 or 6 years ago. Like I had an instance where I'm at a conference, right, going out to dinner with a client, and I'm a hugger. She was a hugger. So we have a couple bottles of wine. We have dinner. Go to give her a hug, and like, bam, like kisses me right in the mouth. And again, I'm like happily married,
Sure.
like, and have been for a long time and want to stay for a long time. But I write every day. So I was like, how do I write about this? But I don't want to burn this relationship because it was an important relationship for me. And so I just came up with these rules of hugging. Like there should be rules about this, right? And so it was professional workplace hugging rules, threw it up on the blog, didn't even think about it. Next day I'm at the conference and like I'm speaking and get off and like my phone is literally, I have like 127 text messages. Like I'm
based on that the hugging thing.
Well, so what happened was like the CEO of LinkedIn, Jeff Weiner, like actually found it. Someone had passed it on and like he shared it and it went viral. And like just literally within hours, like millions of people had read it and people were just, and I was getting calls from like the morning zoo radio shows. And I got like, I was called the expert in workplace hugging, right? The world's expert in workplace hugging. And so it was kind of funny, but I now joke about it because I'll go and talk about it at a conference and I'm like, since Me Too has happened, is now I'm like the middle-aged, white guy on stage talking about hugging during the Me Too movement. But what we found is that it actually translates, right? Because it's about the rules, right? We should have rules when it comes to doing this. And some of it's just is silly ones,
But
right?
aren't a lot of these rules right now, Tim? Just don't do it in the workplace. It's not an appropriate place to put it.
No, because I think we get back to there's that the right shit like the right ditch left ditch thing that happens. Like I think when Me Too hit, everybody pulled it over to the right ditch, right?
Yeah.
And then
overcompensated
for it. I think how do we get this back to the middle of the road? Because when I talk, because we go talk to like HR audiences or even TA audiences at corporate, which are predominantly 75% female.
Yeah.
And I will go and say, hey, raise your hand if you're a hugger. And like half the audience, and most of these are women going, I'm a hugger, right? And so I want to continue to be able to hug in a way that is professional, that's comfortable, that isn't creepy. And there is creepy hugging, right? One of the rules is never hug from behind. That's a creepy hug. Like no,
it's in the news right now.
It's
unfortunately,
in the rules, right? And I tell people that's a rule because we know, like my HR time, like 90% of sexual harassment investigations started with some creepy from behind hug that never should happen. So I think people actually do, but at the same time, like we also know, like you have to know, and I think what we found is that. It's usually some dude that has no like filter that understand that, oh no, I think she really wants it. And you're like, no, dude, no. Like that's not the case, right? Yeah. Like we shouldn't be doing this kind of thing. But I'm still a hugger. And I told people like, hey, I'm gonna continue to hug. But also like, I mean, one of the things I'll do is I would announce. Like when I see you, I'm like, hey, come, let's hug it out. And if you're like, do the Karate Kid thing on me, and you're like, no, I mean, like, that's my indication.
That's cool.
Like, guess
Let
what?
it go.
Steve doesn't want to
hug. That's a good way to look at it because you can't force somebody into it. It seems like it's gotten blown out of proportion recently. Part of it is real. I mean, there are some, as you said, there are some creeps.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, making primarily women very uncomfortable in the workplace, and I mean, we've got to admit that. Yeah, we do have to admit that.
And again, it's mostly dudes, and we have to understand that not every person wants a hug from us, right? And not every person wants a romantic relationship, and not everybody thinks we're super sexy. Like, just like
go hug your wife first.
Yeah, like just kind of figure that out. And again, there's a leadership aspect to it as well that I think as leaders you have to really understand where that place is.
Yeah.
One of the things, like from a social media aspect, is anybody on my staff, I'll never connect with them on social media, but if they request a connection with me, I will connect. And I've told them that, like, because they'll go, well, why are you
They don't
friends
feel
with,
forced.
you're friends
Yeah.
with these 12 people in the office. Why aren't you friends with me? And I'm like, you didn't request. I'm not
Yeah.
going to request, you
Yeah.
know, because I don't want to feel like, oh my gosh, my boss just, and this is creepy. And,
Yeah.
you know,
I don't want to tell them no.
yeah.
That's the issue
Yep.
when it comes
And
to
I
something
and I
like
don't
that.
and I don't ever think anything of it if they don't. Like,
Yeah.
hey, that's you. Like, I don't care. So, but having like just, I guess having just a self-awareness to understand that is important, right?
Kind of along the same lines, but continuing down, diversity's been a topic for years.
Yeah.
You know, around hiring diverse and reflecting your consumer base and all. I mean, there's some really great stuff out there. How do you see that conversation? How has it changed in the last couple of years in light of all the political unrest that's gone on? It's a little more of a serious conversation, but it affects recruiting, does it not, in HR?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we've had a tipping point yet where we've gotten past the politically correct talk of diversity and inclusion, right? So I think we're still there where we have these rose-colored glasses on to say it's always correct, right?
Yeah.
And so if you go and talk to any HR leader, TA leader, any executive of a company, they would go, oh gosh, yeah, we support diversity and inclusion and we have to have this and it's always good. And yet I have examples, right? Like I've worked with heads of like billion-dollar companies where we've gone into some plants that are like going, hey, we're gonna have to close this plant because it's failing.
Yeah.
Because we went full diversity and inclusion. And it totally went from being a profitable facility to a facility that's on fire that we're thinking that we're just gonna have to shutter it, right? And it's funny because when I go to an audience and I say, here's the system, this is the situation, this is what happened, they'll go, oh. And in their mind, they immediately assume that the plant beforehand was 75, 80% white male, right? Yeah. And all of a sudden we brought in females, we brought in black, we brought in Hispanic. And so, that's the argument is that. And the reality is no, the plant actually was 95% Hispanic male. And we brought in more white guys, we brought in more females, we brought in more whatever. And it totally blew up. And so they'll go like, oh, but the thing is the homogeneity of that kind of work environment, right? Of being a plant where you have to do the same process over and over and over and over again. You don't want diversity of thought. You don't want diversity of you don't want people conflicting, right? Because what you said is, hey, we built a process and we need to do this thing 1,000 times an hour and we need to do it exactly the same way. And it turns out homogeneity actually works really well in those environments. Same with actually call center environments as well. Mm-hmm. There's all kinds of different like piecemeal kinds of environments where diversity and inclusion actually blows up and isn't good. Now, if I'm running like a GE for instance, right, and I have facilities that have those issues, but also I have this corporate where I need diversity of thought, I need decision-making challenge, I need innovation. Okay, so I have part of my organization that needs diversity and inclusion. I have part of my organization that needs homogeneity. That's real business talk that we're not allowing to have happen right now that I think is one of the issues that we're facing when it comes to D&I.
Because there's going to be some people that are watching you right now that are going to say, that's not fair, Tim, the way you're talking about it. Because, you know, the whole idea of homogeneity in some of these roles, you're just assuming you can't make it work. So you're saying just leave it as is. Have it all Hispanic, have it all African American, have it all white.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you reconcile that?
Well, there's all kinds of actual studies out there that show now, right? When the first studies came out, all of those studies for D&I were actually measuring were organizations that it was critical for creativity and decision making.
Sure.
And so those all basically.
And every stat you see out there,
it was all confirmation bias,
more
right?
creative, more
we just
diversity.
Confirmed exactly what we thought. You know that we need more diversity of thought, we need more diversity of color and gender and everything because that's going to help us be more innovative, have better decision making. You're exactly right.
Yep.
But there's some of those things, there's some times when we actually don't need that. And again,
the role doesn't dictate
when
that.
I say homogeneity, though, what they assume is I'm talking all white dudes.
That's
I'm
right.
not.
It's not.
Could be, because I've also been in facilities, like sewing facilities, that was all Asian female.
Sure.
By the way, if I started putting a bunch of white dudes in there, it would blow up the same exact way.
Yeah.
So homogeneity isn't bad. We assume it's bad because we're all assuming white males all of a sudden, right? Versus going, hey, and again, there might be a facility where it was all white dudes as well, and that homogeneity works as well. I think we have to be open enough to say, hey, there's times and places where D&I and all of this stuff is great. There's also times when, and I've seen organizations that were, actually from a creative, like marketing standpoint, that was like, hey, I'm a marketing organization. I have 150 people that work for me. By the way, 149 of those are female. because we're actually working with female clients. We're actually working with female products, and this is really important to us.
Sure.
And then I'm like, wait a minute, where are the dudes? And those leaders would push back and say that, like, well, wait a minute, but this is our customer base, this is our client base, this is who we're going for. And so I think there's always circumstances where we have to sit back and say, never 100% of the time is this going to work and be better.
Do you think today that this, because of the diversity thing, especially on the corporate side, that we're afraid to talk about our differences?
Yeah, for sure.
And that's one of the issues that I come up with all the time. So my daughter is a perfect example. Is we raised our kids in a pretty diverse neighborhood where we live today. And when my daughter was graduating from high school, we had senior prom all the girls came to our house. So I took a picture of, there's probably 15 girls, right? And the next day I'm looking at it in the camera, and it looked like the United Nations. I mean, it was great, right? So I showed it to my daughter the next morning, and she looks at it, and I said, what's wrong with this picture? She goes, well, my hair's a mess. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. I said, look at the rest of this. And she couldn't get it. Now, I grew up in a generation like you where diversity was a big issue, right? So I'm pointing out, well, this one happens to be this ethnicity, this one, this, and she's like, oh yeah, that's just how we are. And I said, well, how do you all get along because you're different? And she had to think about it for a second. She says to me, she says, Tim, Dad, Dad, she says, you know what? The thing is, we will ask each other, why is your hair like that? What do you use for your hair? Because it's so different than mine. They're talking about all the differences.
So I'll challenge you to say, I think that's BS.
Why?
So I worked with an employer here in Detroit, and the same thing, they were going, oh, Tim, we don't have a diversity inclusion problem, but yet we're still having, we're not getting this diversity of thought thing down, right? And so they said, we have 3 new hires, right?
Okay.
And it was an Asian female, it was a black female, it was a white female, all the same, right? And so they're like, look, we should have great diversity of thought from these 3 ladies coming in here. And so I said, can I see their resumes, right? Let me see their resumes. And they all went to 3 different schools, but they all went to Mercy. They all came from rich families in rich neighborhoods that their parents could afford to send them to private schools. And then you're like going, you're not going to have diversity. They look different, but they are the same person.
Yeah. So we actually talked about that because so I kind of juxtaposition these two things. So one, they were willing to talk about their differences. Not all of them came from wealthy families because of where we live. It's right on the border, right? So there was a little difference there. But one of the other things that I talk about is I had a neighbor who happened to be African American. What was interesting is when he and I will talk about D&I, we will say we're more alike than people that don't look like us. Right? We're kind of he's got lots of hair, I got none. He's African American, I'm white. But we grew up in the same place. We live in the same place now. We go to we're actually in the same industry, which is kind of interesting. But so we are very much the same.
Yeah, one of the greatest voices right now, I think, in the D&I space is Torrin Ellis. I don't know if you know Torrin, but he came and spoke last year at the Michigan Recruiters Conference for us and stuff like that. And I think because he challenges all of these ideals that we're trying to put out there, I think he really adds something. I know people are going to be watching this going like, oh, there's 2 white dudes that are Gen Xers talking about D&I, but the reality is that's probably like the rest of the Fortune 500 as well.
Yeah.
Trying to figure this out, and so it does. I think we have to raise that level of conversation of where that might be. At the same time, I think as TA leaders and TA pros, that are watching this, what's their role is to challenge those hiring managers that that have biases that are built in, right? Sure. And go out there and literally, now again, don't do it publicly, but behind the doors, you have to really call some people out and say, hey, I sent you 5 resumes, of which 3 were female, and you only asked me to interview the dudes. There's a problem.
Yeah.